Hello, friends. Hello, welcome. Hey, welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Here we are in the middle of the summer. Just want to welcome you. Welcome you as you're tuning in here. Hey friends, I just want to say, so glad you're here today. Today's topic for today's webinar is sabbatical prep, how to plan and prepare for your first or next sabbatical. My name is Drew. I am a pastor, the lead pastor of a church here in Midtown Manhattan, as well as we have three locations here in Manhattan, and the church is called Hope Church NYC, and I'm also the executive director of Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. I actually was on staff with Pete Scazzaro from 2001 to 2011 while he was the lead pastor. Since that time, we've worked very closely on emotionally healthy discipleship, and it's just been an honor to be on this journey with him. And emotionally healthy discipleship has dramatically changed and transformed my own life. And today's topic is one that is near and dear to me, and you'll hear a little bit more of my own story today. In addition to that, you'll also hear from some teaching from Pete Scazzaro. Some of you have already started this, but would love to hear where you all are tuning in from. So if you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat, just where are you tuning in from? Would love to see. I see San Juan, Puerto Rico in the house. Nairobi, thank you. Welcome. So glad to have you. Uh, I saw Portland, Oregon, Colorado, London in the UK, Cincinnati. Yes, this is wonderful. Southern California, we have someone visiting from Ghana with us, Miami, Northern Virginia, Seattle, Washington, Trinidad. As you can see, we have people visiting from all over the world. So just want to say welcome. So glad you're here. Just a couple of quick notes. We do have translation available. And so for those of you who would like to listen in real time, a translation in Spanish, you can go down to the toolbar at the bottom and actually click on interpretation. And that should get you linked up with our wonderful interpreter named Adrian, who is part of the team here at Emotional Healthy Discipleship. In addition to that, we will have a significant time for Q&A that will happen for the last half of this webinar. And we're asking that you use the Q&A function for that Q&A time. So instead of dropping it in the chat, if you could actually use the Q&A function, and we'll get through a lot of these questions, especially as we address this topic of how to plan your next or your first sabbatical. And so with that said, would love to introduce Pete Scazzaro, who's going to share some of his own thoughts on a theology as well as some practical tips around sabbaticals. Here's Pete.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you all here. Our topic today is sabbatical prep, how to plan and prepare for your first or your next sabbatical. Well, let me just give you a three-word answer to the topic, which is this. How do you prepare? The answer is with great difficulty. And the reason it's so difficult is because so much is at stake. There's enormous warfare going on around the idea of a sabbatical, for you taking a sabbatical, the implications for you, for your ministry, for the long-term missional impact of what God's called you to do is gigantic, for the sustainability of your ministry and your church for generations actually is potentially at stake as well. And there's a lot of teaching that happens when you do a sabbatical. So there's a lot going on here around sabbatical. That's why it's with great difficulty. So I've had three, and next year I will do my fourth and probably final sabbatical. And each one has been so life-changing, so transformative. I would not, New Life Fellowship would not have had an excellent succession without it. And EHD would not exist without it. I would not be where I am today. I think I consider myself still vibrant, flourishing, enjoying God and serving Him and leading, and I love it. This ministry wouldn't even exist without those sabbaticals. So if you're going to flourish long term, it's that important. So let me just make a few comments about the biblical basis of what we're talking about here, and then I'll give you a few tips, and then Drew will take it from there and fill out the rest of it. Okay? So let's think with me for a moment, just biblically, okay? There's a Sabbath practice, which is a biblical spiritual formation practice, core in Scripture, that that we work 6 days and we take a 24-hour period every week where we stop our work, we rest because God is on the throne. We let Him replenish our soil. We delight in Him, and we delight in all His gifts in the world. And we're not working. We're letting Him again. We're getting replenished, and then finally we're seeing the invisible God and all the beauty of creation. So uh, there's Sabbath, which I trust is built into your life on a weekly basis. And recommend, okay, Romans 14, it doesn't matter which day you take, but the key is that you have a rhythm on the same day, each week. For me, it's Fridays, Friday night at 6 till Saturday night at 6. I tend to now, I'm not leading a local church, I'll extend it through Sunday. But my wife and I are very conscious of Sabbath and as a delightful time. And then I call mini sabbaticals or vacations. I trust you have a vacation every year for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever it might be. But and long holidays around Christmas, etc. That I call not just vacations, I call them vacation slash mini sabbaticals. Because the same principles apply: stopping, resting, delighting, getting replenished. And I compare it to the national festivals that Israel had for centuries. Throughout the Old Testament, they would travel to Jerusalem. They'd stop their work and they would worship and gather together and celebrate the different feasts of Passover and Tabernacles, etc. And I consider vacations, I treat just like that. So hopefully your vacations are like mini sabbaticals that you plan accordingly. But then there's sabbaticals, which is based on the Old Testament teaching as a principle that every seventh year in this agricultural society, they would rest the soil, that they would not work the soil. They were commanded by God to give it a sabbatical year. Otherwise, you rape the soil, you suck all the nutrients out of it. And the same principle applies to us as vocational pastors and leaders. And maybe you're even a key volunteer, you're giving a great deal. Maybe you're bivocational. Maybe you're leading a nonprofit. Maybe you're leading a parachurch ministry, or you're a staff of a parachurch or a church. If you're giving out a tremendous amount, preaching, teaching, caring for people, your soil needs extended rest beyond Sabbaths and beyond vacations. That's a sabbatical. And I like to say a 3 to 4 month period where you tack your vacation on it as well, 12 to 14 weeks, where you let your soil rest. You divorce your identity of whatever your role might be, your title might be. You're just a servant of Jesus. You're just his son or his daughter. And each sabbatical, you want to have a theme. So my first sabbatical happened in a crisis, actually. Jerry and I hit a wall in our marriage. We'd had this revelation about emotional health and spiritual maturity were inseparable, but we knew we needed to step away, and rebuild some new habits into our personal lives, into our family, and into my leadership before I came back into the system of the church. And I was the planter of the church. So we took 3 months. It was life changing. We came back into the church. We had gone through a lot of changes. It was so significant. We did a lot of therapy, a lot of reading. We went to some conferences where emotional health was talked about, and this integration, really significant. Then my second sabbatical was on the contemplative. It was really learning from monks. And we went to different monasteries: Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Protestant. I wanted to learn from folks who had dedicated their lives to prayer and quiet and silence and solitude, and learn from them about slowing down. It was life changing. That was 4 months. Uh, yeah, it was unbelievable. But then we came back and began to bring this to our church as well. We didn't go with the intention of changing our church, but it did because we got changed. When you change, the whole ministry changes. That's the beauty of this. Our third sabbatical is around our succession and transition at New Life Fellowship after 26 years. And right before we did that succession, we took a sabbatical. And again, 4 months. And the goal there was transition succession. That was the whole learning about that. And again, very significant. And actually, our next sabbatical is we transition again, but it's around our last final leg around the track, for God. And so again, then we actually gave it to staff who are with us long term, and again, we saw the same benefits, the same riches for them as we received as well. So it's just so powerful. And what's interesting is secular companies are now doing sabbaticals. I mean, my daughter works for a corporate environment. She's getting a sabbatical. It's only for a month, but a number of companies, secular companies, are integrating sabbaticals for their high leaders, high level leaders, because they know the whole company benefits. But of course, for us, how much more so as we're speaking and leading for God. What a task, right? So here I'm going to give you a few tips to take away from, think about. One is this: you want to be thinking long term. That's why you want to take a sabbatical. The reason you need it is you're not God. You're not inexhaustible. You have limits, severe limits. And to be giving out and giving out and giving out, especially if you're teaching and preaching regularly, I don't care, leading any kind of ministry for God, it is just, it's a lot. This isn't like I'm going to be a carpenter. It's holy, eternal work. So think long term sustainability. God means for you to flourish over decades. You want to be flourishing in your 60s and 70s and 80s for God and not be washed out, burnt out. That is not God's will for you. I believe our best decades are in our as we get older. Number two, number two tip is you want to discern what's God's invitation for you on this particular sabbatical. So you want to be praying way in advance, thinking about your sabbaticals, because um, whatever you're going to receive, it's going to really impact your ministry. And so it takes a lot of thought way in advance. I'd say it takes at least 6 to 12 months to prepare for a sabbatical because you have a board to get involved, you got other staff, who's filling in what role. And it just takes time. It just takes time to really think about it, learn about sabbaticals. You want to talk to some folks who've done sabbaticals. Thirdly, is your goal is your formation in Jesus. Your goal is not get strategy for your church or your ministry. That'll come naturally afterwards. You'll think about it at the end of your sabbatical. When it's over, take a few days after that sabbatical's over, and then maybe you've put some notes in your journal, say, what are some applications for my ministry here? That'll come easy. And that's why you're disengaging your identity as a pastor, or as a worship leader, whatever it might be. You're disengaging from that. You're just a son, daughter of God. It's just beautiful. Fourth tip is, again, the preparation is hard. It may look like I can't do this. You need to think about what are you going to do before to get ready for it. What needs to happen in the organization or church, and then when you return, how do you slowly come back in? Because a lot of good things are going to happen when you're gone. I thought the church was going to go down, right, when I left for each of my sabbaticals. They didn't. They did great without me. They did great. In fact, one of the great teachings of what happens in a sabbatical is you're showing everybody in the body of Christ is you're not indispensable. You're dispensable. I mean, God is indispensable. The rest of us, the kingdom will go on, and good body life is nobody gets in a role where the body needs you so badly. If you go, the whole thing's going down. You're communicating that. That's the next tip. You're teaching by this sabbatical. You're teaching about rhythms. You're teaching about being and doing and the rhythm of that. Uh, I remember we talked about in each of the sabbaticals when to call me if there's a crisis. So I determined one board member was elected to communicate with me for 1 hour each month. They were not to talk about the church, just they were to find out how I was doing and to get an update from me. And I said, if the building burns down, there's no reason to call me because there's nothing I'm going to do about it. The only reason they were going to contact me is if somebody on the board died, or staff, or the family member of theirs, something tragic happened. Then of course I would come back in. But uh, there was a hurricane actually in one of my sabbaticals in New York City, and it was so significant. Came on a Saturday night that the question was, does the church close for Sunday? And you know how weather reports are. And I remember watching this. I was on sabbatical, and uh, they didn't call me. And they actually made a decision. The only time in my 26-year tenure, they closed church that Sunday. And I thought it was just great. It was great. But they had to wrestle with the decision, and it was super. It was just great. So again, we're communicating so much. We're giving people a chance to rise up, the body to be the body, and they need you to go away, actually, although they think they can't afford it. Sixthly or seventhly, consider finding a coach. There are people who can coach you on sabbaticals. Definitely find a mentor, folks who've done it before. You can ask around. There are folks who've done sabbaticals at this point, but you want to get some mentoring. I know folks who've hired a coach to help them think through it in advance, because there's a lot of dynamics to doing it and a lot to learn. Seventhly is don't overplan. Don't overplan. Just you don't want to plan too much in your sabbatical. You do this for Jesus. You do this for the people you love. You do this for your community. You do this for the world. and you want to be flourishing by God's grace for decades to come. So I'll hand this over to Drew right now, who will fill in lots more riches around sabbatical prep. All right, thanks. Take it away, Drew.
Thanks, Pete. Um, so a little of my own story is like I mentioned, I was on staff with Pete Scazzero at New Life Fellowship, first as an intern, and then 10 years later, I was a senior associate pastor at the church. So during that time, my life radically changed, not only being under his leadership, but being in the culture of a church that began to talk about both emotional health and a slow down spirituality. And part of a slow down spirituality was this introduction to these practices, these ancient practices such as Sabbath keeping, as well as sabbaticals. So fast forward 2011 is when I left staff. And in 2012, my wife and I, as well as a small group of us, we ended up starting a church called Hope Church NYC right here in New York City that we begin planting churches throughout New York and beyond. And so currently, I'm the lead pastor of our church called Hope Church NYC. We have 3 locations in Manhattan, and we've helped start a number of churches all around the city as well as around the world. Now, as part of that, the reason why I give you a little background of our own church is because my name is Drew, and I'm a workaholic. Hi, Drew. It is in me. It's this drivenness, this mission. One of the things I love about the Protestant tradition is our focus on mission and accomplishing and up and to the right. In fact, there's something called the Protestant work ethic that tells us that, that gives like the basis for working hard comes from this background of valuing Scripture and the God of the Scriptures. And so because of that, though, as we were going into our church planting journey, my wife and I knew that in our rule of life, in other words, in the framework by which we would follow Jesus, we knew that not only did we need a weekly rhythm of Sabbath keeping, which of course is the fourth commandment in the Ten Commandments, but in addition to that, that we would need a rhythm of sabbaticals. And so, what we initially did when we first started the church, as we were setting the foundation of our church plant, which started in 2012, the number one thing we did was to set a rhythm of sabbaticals. Now, here's why this is important, is because here's been my experience whenever I talk to people, especially in our church community or in other settings, whenever I tell people that I'm on sabbatical, here is the most common response that I get from people. They're like, oh my goodness, are you okay? Are you and your wife okay? Like they think it's some sort of crisis or scandal, or they're like, oh my goodness, are, are you leaving the church? Now, here's what I recognize that in the history of especially the Protestant evangelical tradition, then most people they associate sabbaticals with, oh, this is kind of a forced time out for anyone who's struggling and having difficulty or embroiled in some sort of scandal, or they're on their last legs and they're probably going to leave the church. Now, I mean, that's the tradition that we come from, friends. But as Pete mentioned, we have the riches of the scriptures have talked about not only Sabbath keeping, but also a rhythm of letting the land, for instance, in Leviticus 25 and in Exodus 23, of actually every 7 years having this rhythm of rest. And this is where sabbatical practices come from. Now, the reason why I say set a rhythm of sabbaticals is because oftentimes this is the first step. And the reason why is because most of us, we go on sabbatical when we're in some sort of crisis or we're burning out or something is happening in our marriage and family. In other words, it happens too late. And here's what ends up happening. We tend to think, and again, this is in my conversations with different pastors, we tend to think, oh, if I can just get a sabbatical, then my family will be healthy. Or if I just get a sabbatical, then I'll come back replenished and ready for another grind. But here's the reality. A sabbatical is not what you need. Now you're probably wondering, you're like, isn't this webinar about sabbaticals? No, what you need is a sustainable life. A sabbatical is not going to solve some of the issues that got you into the place that you're in right now, perhaps, of burnout and of your marriage and family taking a backseat. You see, the key to a sustainable life is a sustainable life, is a life with God that is focused on Jesus, centered around Jesus, and making the important things. And so sabbaticals are simply one part of a larger process. We call this a rule of life. Sabbaticals are just one part of that rule of life for how we're going to live in the day to day. And so the reason why step one is to set a rhythm of it, it's not to simply say, I'm just going to do a sabbatical and then everything will get better. And then 20, 30 years from now, I'll be great because I did this sabbatical. No, it's how does this flow into the rhythm of your life? A sustainable life that is really centered around Jesus. The key to a sustainable life is not a sabbatical. The key to a sustainable life is a sustainable life. Now, here's what happens then when there's a rhythm of sabbaticals. So, in our church community, as we were setting this foundation, we said that the lead pastor would get a 3 month sabbatical every 3 years. Now, I recognize that different people have different rhythms. That rhythm was the rhythm for us because honestly, I tend to work really hard and be very driven. And I knew that I needed as much discipline as possible to stop, rest, delight, and contemplate. And see, when there's a rhythm of sabbaticals, here's what a rhythm of sabbaticals does. First, it gives you a runway to set up your church for your departure. So every 3 years, then, I'm thinking 3 years ahead of what does our church need so that I can become, as Pete mentioned, dispensable. In other words, so that it's almost like I died. It's like I did succession. What does the church need so that I am not the center of this thing? And here's what it does then. In those 3 years, my intentional focus, because the time is ticking, I know that I'm on sabbatical in 3 years. I know I need to invest in the leaders behind me. I need to invest in discipleship. I need to actually open up opportunities for people to be trained in discipleship and preaching and in other ways. And do you see how the mindset changes when there's a rhythm of sabbaticals? Moreover, as Pete mentioned, it's hard work to prepare for a sabbatical. So every 3 years, once my sabbatical finishes, I'm thinking about my next sabbatical. And because of that, I'm thinking, what are the ways in which my own inner life, I'm constantly journaling on, God, what are the ways that you want to deeply transform me and where I'll have the time and spaciousness to do that? Okay, number two, uh, when it comes to is to practice letting go before you go on sabbatical. Now, what do I mean by practicing letting go? As Pete mentioned, um, uh, my first sabbatical, one of the most difficult things was actually the first couple of weeks. And the reason why is because I was worried about everything. I was worried about whether the coffee would get made, on Sunday mornings, whether we'd have enough granola bars for our snack and connection table. It was interesting how like I was so preoccupied with all of these different tasks that needed to get done. And in addition to that, I got a little depressed. I mean, you got to imagine, like, here I am being the center of a church community. I get up and I preach before God and for God in front of all these people. And I realized there was a little bit of depression because I was in some ways irrelevant. And here's what I realized what the greatest gift of a sabbatical is. It's a practice of me extricating my own ego from our church community, from my role, from all the ways in which I think I'm so important. And so I realize in many ways it's a practice of discipleship, of taking up your cross and following Jesus. I use the phrase letting go, practice letting go, but it's really a practice in dying. Sorry, you probably didn't expect that on this sabbatical webinar. You thought sabbaticals were refreshing, and they are. They're incredible. But first, they hurt a whole lot because they remind me it's almost like I've been addicted to this drug of my own significance, my own voice, and my own kind of stature within the church. And when I go through the discipline of letting go, attending a church community without having to be at the center of it, without evaluating, without what ends up happening is my soul needs to go through that work, the work of dying, so that I can live. And so the more you can actually, as you prepare for sabbatical, you should almost prepare for it. It's going to be hard. But what you can begin to do is practice letting go of power, letting go of, well, sometime, who knows what's going to happen to the granola bars? Of course, we want to make plans for those things, but we want to practice letting go, investing in the right ways. The discipline of dispensability and the discipline of irrelevance. Number three, to practice to model your sabbatical, as Pete mentioned, after the themes of Sabbath keeping, to stop. So to stop from anything that relates to work. So when I go on sabbatical, my Slack notifications, I have not checked Slack, my church emails, I don't respond to, when needed. I'm not available. Like I've disconnected from every social media thing. I've disconnected from, I don't check our website, our church center app, the events that are coming up, the giving, like all of that is I stop. I stop completely. And again, it hurts and I get so anxious. But again, it's a practice in dying so I can live. And so I stop. I take times to rest. Rest means intentional practices and ways, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Delight, which we talk about, how Sabbaths are supposed to be a taste of heaven. And so how can we plan sabbaticals that are not only I'm stopping, but I'm also resting, but they're also full of delight. And lastly, I'm contemplating. I'm constantly doing the inner work. Now, oftentimes when we talk about sabbatical, we talk about people, practices, and places as well. And this is just one kind of format in addition to stop, rest, delight, and contemplate where I'm discerning during a sabbatical when it comes to people. So I'm disconnected from our church community. Now, does that mean that if someone texts me or asks me something, I'm not going to respond at all? No, sometimes I will, but for the most part, or I'll kindly tell people that I'm on sabbatical. But for the most part, who are the people, those life-giving friendships that I'm going to prioritize? The same way for Sabbath, where my priority is my family and those life-giving friendships and relationships. Those are the ones that I'm going to prioritize. When it comes to practices, what are some practices that I'm going to do uh, that I usually do on my Sabbaths that I'm going to do on my sabbaticals? One practice that I've had here in the city, early in the morning, I'll take out my scooter with a helmet and I'll just explore different neighborhoods early in the morning on my own. And it just fills my soul. I'll just be out in the city for an hour and a half. Um, and practices like that. I routinely practice napping, routinely practice other spiritual practices in addition to that, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then lastly, places. What are the places that will be replenishing for me? And what are the places that will not be replenishing for me? And guess what? During sabbaticals, I have permission to say yes and no to and go through this filter of stopping, resting, delighting, contemplating, of thinking through who are the people that I really want to focus on and that will be really life-giving for me and practices as well as places. Um, and then lastly, here's the last principle that I would like to talk about. It's invest in the inner life of an emotionally healthy leader. Now, Pete talked about this, and the reason why I'm specifically using this language of the inner life of an emotionally healthy leader, and I actually wrote sometimes an outer life. I know that Pete mentioned don't focus on the outer life. I just want you to know I don't want to moralize that in any way. Sometimes I do, like, I will sign up for a leadership seminar just because I naturally gravitate towards reading books on leadership. And I do have tons of ideas and thoughts. I mean, as I get back from sabbatical in September. But for the most part, the emphasis is on your inner life. Now, what do I mean by the inner life? In Pete's book, Emotionally Healthy Leader, which I would highly recommend. If you've never read that book, MJ is going to drop it in the chat. In the Emotionally Healthy Leader, we talk about four aspects of the inner life of an emotionally healthy leader. And number one is to face your shadow. In other words, to do the emotional health journey. Pete in his podcast has been talking about family of origin issues. So just so you know, so every sabbatical that I go on every 3 years, I'm doing shadow work. For me, it was around defensiveness in my marriage, as well as on staff at times. I realized that there's been a defensiveness that I've carried. So I've not only met with my therapist each month, but I've also gone to three different kind of spiritual kind of gatherings where I'm wrestling with my family of origin and how it's contributed to my own defensiveness and how God wants to really transform that. Now, I have other shadows. Believe me, my wife can probably tell you about a lot more. But there's intentional time for God to do an excavation work, especially around my shadow. Number two is to lead out of your marriage or singleness. And if you have children, to invest in those relationships. So, a big chunk of my sabbatical is spent with life-giving time with my wife as well as with my children. It's a big part of how I'm gonna like plan, scope out the sabbatical. Number three and four are similar. It's slow down for loving union and practice Sabbath delight. It basically is what are the contemplative practices? So for me, like I mentioned, not only am I doing emotional health work, I'm also doing slowed down spirituality. So I'm spending even more times in silence in my daily office. I'm actually, like I mentioned, I try to do at least a day alone with God, which I try to do every month. But I try to do that in an extended way through these various spiritual retreats whenever I am going on sabbatical. Now, here are some of the things that Pete talks about in the outer life of a leader. I'm just going to mention them here only because, like, you know, if you want to learn and grow and develop in other ways, I'd say go for it. But the emphasis should first be on your inner life. And here are the things in the outer life is planning and decision making, culture and team building, power and wise boundaries, endings and new beginnings. Again, I'd like to highly recommend the book Emotionally Healthy Leader for you in that regard. Now, like I mentioned, though, at the end of the day, it really is about a sustainable life. I mean, that's what we're all about at Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. We often use this phrase, emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable. At the end of the day, any sabbatical should lead towards us becoming emotionally healthy, which is going to lead towards us being spiritually healthy. In other words, it's not possible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. We also have this phrase, as goes the leader, so goes the church. At the end of the day, the reason to go on a sabbatical and the steps that you're going to take is you want to come back so that the best thing that you give to your church is not some incredible vision, some great strategy that you read from this book. It's you, a transformed you that is abiding with Jesus, that is full of life and joy, that hopefully for me is less defensive, that models hopefully a pastor whose presence is loving towards my wife and towards my kids, and that the whole church benefits from that. Now, here's the thing, you cannot give what you do not possess. And so sabbaticals are simply one part of what it means to have a sustainable, emotionally healthy life. When we talk about emotional healthy spirituality, we often use this kind of framework from Bloom's taxonomy about how do we actually get EHS. We talk about being aware of it first, and then going from awareness. So first, maybe you're aware of like, gosh, I really should have some rhythms in my life. Then you ponder it for a little bit. And then after you ponder it, you start to value it and you start to tell other people, hey, rhythms are really, really important for one's life. And this is why God, the rhythm of Genesis 1, the rhythm that's even found in the fourth commandment. But then there's this big action behavioral gap that we need to get over. And it's unless I actually set the dates of the sabbatical, set the rhythms. I'm going to do this every 3 years. There's not some sort of crisis that's going to somehow change my rhythms for this. And then I begin to prioritize it. And after I prioritize it, then I start to own it. It just becomes part of my natural rhythm. Now, you and I know this, the global crisis of discipleship that we often talk about. So many of the ways in which we're trying to form people tend to be not life transforming, but very surface level. Now, here's a traditional way that most people, most churches do discipleship. It's meet Jesus, attend, connect, grow, and serve, and then impact from there. But what we're talking about is we're looking for when it comes to our churches that we ourselves need to walk through first. Is to actually we meet Jesus, we attend, but we go through deep change. That's hopefully what discipleship is. And sabbaticals are part of that. And out of that deep change comes impact. Now, here's kind of one graphic that we often use is modern day discipleship, as well as the Jesus way of investing in a few. Now, I mentioned how, do you see how even our multiplication strategy as a church is I'm investing in the most important thing, that is discipleship. And if I have a regular rhythm of sabbaticals, it keeps me focused on like, gosh, my goal is not to build the biggest crowd. It's to invest in the leaders behind me who can lead when I'm dead and gone. Now, hopefully, I'm alive a lot longer. But in many ways, sabbaticals help us keep what's important important. Now, our central discipleship course that we use at our church community, and one that we at Emotion Healthy Discipleship talk about, is the Emotion Healthy Discipleship course. These are the themes that talk about, again, the rhythms that I'm trying to demonstrate not only to our church community, but to our entire church staff. And I'm so blessed to have elders and leaders who are also committed to this. And part one of the Emotion Healthy Spirituality course, you can see that here, uh, is introducing people to a transformative spirituality with God, introducing these practices of solitude, silence, daily office, Sabbath keeping, facing your shadow, as well as emotion healthy relationships, which is part two, which is another 8-week course, which are practical skills to launch people into transformative relationships. Now, here's an overview of both of these courses. You can see part one here, the different weeks and the different themes that we go over in part one and part two. And so when we talk about deepening and changing a culture, here is what our culture looks like at our church community. Our church community has this transformational discipleship pathway. We're constantly talking about emotion healthy discipleship as a way to follow Jesus most wholeheartedly. But in the midst of that, I'm hopefully modeling this by the way that I'm discipling others, by the way that I'm taking seriously a slow down spirituality, leading out of my marriage and family, facing my shadow, and so on and so forth. And so here again is an overview of emotional healthy spirituality, which is part one. Here's part two. We can actually um, go through both of these. Now, here's emotionally healthy relationships. Um, you can see other seminars that we've taught. In fact, in the chat, we'll drop different resources related to the course. We can go to the next slide here. Here's a pyramid of some of the skills that we teach in the Emotion Healthy Relationships course. So I'm revisiting all these different skills when I'm on sabbatical. And we as a church, we run this course in a centralized, high quality way. We offer it both online as well as in person. So every semester, every fall and every spring, we're offering part one of the course, one semester, and then part two of the course, the next semester. And every year, our church knows this is our central discipleship course. And our pastors and leaders are very much involved in running this course. And hopefully, what we're doing then is we're building a culture that sabbaticals, again, are part of. The reason why I can talk about sabbaticals in our church so freely is because our whole church talks about being before doing. Our whole church, this conversation around the rhythms of rest and work, especially in a city like New York and in Midtown Manhattan. Um, our people are very understanding because we've built this culture that's embedded in our way of following Jesus. Now, we recognize as an organization, we want to help serve you. So, we actually do have a leaders training vault. For some of you, if this is the first time that you're hearing about the course, you can actually go to our website. And as you get started, we have training materials that you can actually see. Here's another slide that basically, once you create an account, you can get access to videos and resources on how to bring this course to your church. Now, we would love for you, when it comes to this course in your church, bring it slowly because there's nothing worse than actually doing the course without living it. And so we definitely want to provide training so that you can hopefully start with a small pilot with a small group of people to train people together. And again, here's an overview of the discipleship course, part one and part two. More than simply being like a small group curriculum, we want to help you change your culture. Here's an example for our church, which we often talk about. The course is at the center of, again, when we talk about how we do preaching, staffing, discipleship, missions, worship, it's at the center of what we're talking about, which is why sabbaticals are such a welcome way of, people were thrilled that I'm on sabbatical. I texted someone from our church today. So I'm on sabbatical from our church. This is a unique sabbatical this summer because I'm still doing stuff with emotional healthy discipleship. But but this summer I've been completely disconnected from our church community. And while I was on this hour and a half kind of just cruising around the city, and I texted just someone from our church who lives in a specific area and just said that I was thinking of them and praying for them. And they texted me back and they said, "Thanks, Drew. You shouldn't have texted me." I love that. And they were like, "We hope you're really getting refreshed during your sabbatical." I mean, I love being part of a church where it's part of the culture. And it's because of these courses uh, that we've embedded, I believe. Now, if you're interested, there's two ways to start. Number one, for some of you, maybe it's again going to our website and getting trained and running a pilot course with a handful of people on how do we embed a culture of emotional health and a slow down spirituality. The second part is we actually have a school for leaders that's been so transformational for a multitude of pastors and leaders from around the world. This school, it's a high level leadership mentoring course online that I lead with a number of others, and Pete provides teaching, and he'll drop in for some live Q&A. And we'd love for you to apply to that, or people from your team, and you'll get a glimpse of how can this course begin to be incredibly transformational. First, for you, that you would take this course and experience it in such a manner. We've gotten so much great feedback about how transformational this school has been. So here's what it would look like to start. Uh, First, you can go ahead and you can take a personal assessment, you can start the course, and then you can prepare to revolutionize your life, leadership, and church. I realize got a little excited talking about sabbaticals and this course. Again, we would love our greatest goal is really to resource you because the key to a sustainable life is a sustainable life. Sabbaticals are just one part of it. And I hope that whatever kind of has been shared today gives some practical tools related to it. All right, we're going to go into our Q&A now. Um, and again, if you can actually just drop your questions into the Q&A function, and I'll go ahead and start to answer some of these right now. Chris, we can just, yep, go to me. And so, Ray, you asked, I have a 3-month sabbatical coming up, and I have it mapped out pretty well. Awesome. Love to hear best practices in re-entry well. I'm the lead pastor with a staff that have all been on their 2 to 3 month sabbaticals. That's amazing, Raymond. It's amazing that you've planned it. Here's what I would recommend. So my first Sunday back, I'm not preaching. So I'm there to enjoy. My first Sunday back, I'm actually going to share my learnings from sabbatical. So you got to understand. So like I'm not revving into, oh my goodness, sermon planning, like let's get going on the book of James or whatever else it might be. I'm actually just sharing my own reflections so that again, I'm modeling my own personal growth and also out of my own personal growth in the ways that God has met me. Now, the problem is I probably have 3 or 4 sermons already, like just because it's just been awesome having this time and spaciousness and again facing my shadow leading out of my marriage and hearing from God and lectio divina and prayer. And so I would recommend not rushing into things but slowly kind of coming back into things. And obviously there's an inbox of a number of messages to get back to and recognizing, hey, I'm gonna slowly re-enter. So that's what I recommend, not preaching the first or second week. Um, Taking the first week or so just to check in with key leaders that I might be discipling. Um, and I think people are very understanding of that. And trying to, whatever rhythms that I've established, trying to keep those same rhythms as I re-enter. All right. Joel, you have this question. We just went through emotional healthy leaders as staff. I feel our new lead pastor thinks we are working one way, but it feels like what is being asked of us or how he's leading feels very busy. How do I know when to rise to the seeming expectations and when to address them or give time to settle as a new staff together? Joel, that's a great question. I'm not sure if you've taken part two of emotionally healthy discipleship, which is emotional healthy relationships. I would actually, if not, the school is actually going to be on part two this fall. I'd recommend that you apply and you take part two. And there's a skill there called climbing the ladder of integrity, which I would highly recommend. Whenever I'm going through discernment, there's a number of tools that I use. One is called Explore the Iceberg, another is called Climb the Ladder of Integrity, where I'm going to do my own kind of sifting of my own soul, my emotions, and I'm wrestling with God as well as with maybe a spiritual director or a counselor or a coach of some sort of what is God saying to me about what I should or should not bring up, and how can I bring it up if I do have something that needs to that reaches a point where because of my own integrity and values, I need to say something, then I want to be able to frame what I say in a manner that would be helpful and constructive instead of uh, triggering and defensive and offensive. So, for instance, if I were like even when I'm in conversations with Pete Scazzero, for instance, right now, who's my boss, I'm stepping in as the president. Like, there's a way that I can approach Pete and be like, Pete, I think you're completely wrong, and I think, like, um, I think you've shown really bad leadership in the way that you're trying to implement emotionally healthy succession or whatever. I don't know. Like, that like you can see how even the way that I phrase that could be really hurtful and harmful for our relationship long term. But emotional healthy relationships, we actually have a number of different tools on how do I speak the truth in love, as Ephesians 4 says. And how do I first get at what do I really value and what am I trying to communicate when it comes to Pete and some of the disagreements I have with him related to the succession process that we're in right now? So, if that makes sense, so I'd highly recommend that tool for you as you bring it up, and maybe even just recommend, to your pastor, like, hey, I noticed there's this webinar that I was in about how a sustainable life. And I really love this webinar. I'd love to hear what you think. Perhaps you could do that. So, uh, Jeremy, you asked a question. How do you introduce this into the culture of a church? I have never had a sabbatical. Oh, Jeremy, gosh, I thank you for saying that. I think that's most churches. So, number one is first, I would try to live into a Sabbath rhythm first. Like, get into a rhythm of how to live out a slow down spirituality. And then I might recommend to my board and to some key leaders to read Emotional Healthy Spirituality or Emotional Healthy Leader, or to participate in the school, or to do a pilot course, just to get on the same page around the culture that we aspire to be and to be part of. Um, I would not, let me repeat this, and I should have said this from the start. I would not go to your board and be like, hey, there was this one bald Korean American pastor from New York who says he does a 3 month sabbatical every 3 years. Can you do that for us? Yeah, I would just don't approach it that way. I don't even know why I mentioned bald, but anyhow, uh, what I would do is I would simply start with saying like, these are some values that I realized as I was reading this, or as I heard this podcast, or as I listened to this webinar, that I hoped could be true of our church that mimics the way of Jesus. Because really, when we talk about emotionally healthy discipleship, really what we're talking about is how do we live out John chapter 15? A life of abiding? How do we live out a life of prayer, of being and doing like Jesus in the Gospels, who has this regular rhythm of praying and acting? And so, and what I would recommend is like then bring it to the key leaders and start slowly. I actually would not start with sabbaticals. I'd start with an overall culture that values the rhythms that God has given to us. Uh, and how do we embed this into the culture of our church? And I would recommend starting by saying, like, if you're the lead pastor or if you're on staff, to say, listen, I've been the culprit of perpetuating a culture that hasn't lived into this. Here's a resource that's been helpful for me. Can we read this together or go through this together? So, yeah. Sheldon, how do you do a sabbatical effectively when you have young children? That's a great question. So, again, we were in this sabbatical rhythm every 3 years. So we took a sabbatical 20, the church started in 2012. 2015, I had a son who was 3 years old. 2016 rather, I'm sorry, my daughter had just been born, and my son, at that point was 4 years old. So they were young kids. And um, first, there's actually, if you again, if you've ever taken the course, in week 7 of the course, we talk about the week 6 of the course, we talk about the rhythms of daily office and Sabbath keeping. And in the back, there's an FAQ around how do you practice Sabbath with a young family. I'd recommend looking at that. But in addition to that, when it relates to the sabbatical, I mean, here's basically, we weren't going to do a lot of traveling with young kids. We were going to prioritize my family. We were going to prioritize my marriage and as well as our extended family. Our extended family, a lot of them live outside of New York. And so we were basically like, hey, we have a 1 year old at home. What we're going to focus on is like, just like Sabbaths for us, every week was a time to stop, rest, delight, and contemplating. We were sleeping and napping at every opportunity that we um, of course, we had the chores and diapers and things like that. But there were moments where both my wife and I, we were trying to prioritize that season as a time of rest, delight. Disconnecting from church itself was such a gift when we had a young family. So I just want to recommend for you, as you think about a sabbatical, I would try not to have it be overly ambitious. Um, for instance, I know it's tempting. Actually, one of my mentors said to me, he said, um, any vacation with kids below the age of 12. And this actually changed our lives. He said, don't focus on trying to take them to Disneyland or to all these, remote special places. He says, anywhere there's a pool is fine." That was the recommendation. And it was interesting because I was like, "Oh, I got to give my kids the life that I never had and all this stuff." And I just realized, and he was like, listen, kids don't even remember any of that stuff. They just want to be around a pool. And I realized, wow, that's super easy for us then. We're not stressed out. We're just going somewhere where there's a pool before, and then after they turn 12, they might appreciate things a bit more. So, um, there you go. So, but again, try going through that filter of stopping, resting, delighting, and contemplating. All right, Micah, you ask, we're a 2 year old church plant, but we're already putting money away for year 7 sabbaticals. That's awesome. How much financial assistance should gift to a pastor? Should pastors put away additional funds for sabbaticals, or should it all be covered 100% by the church? Ideally, I think a church should help significantly with a sabbatical. For us, we have a development budget for our pastoral staff. And so I can dip into that when it comes to some of what's happening on the sabbatical. Now, I recommend there's also a Lilly grant that actually what allowed Pete to go away on his sabbaticals was the Lilly grant. And on sabbaticals, um, again, you could look up Lilly Grant sabbaticals. You Google that, and there's a way that you can apply a year in advance, and they'll give. And it needs to be a well-crafted sabbatical, though. And again, that's where Pete's talking about having a theme for each sabbatical, making sure that it's restful but also formational. Um, but for the most part, I would work with my church and church board on how much of it is funded and how much is not. Like some of the trips, the family trips that my wife and I are going on, we recognize that we're not, that we're going to cover that just out of our own pockets because um, of some other things that the church might be covering. So that's how I would work it. And again, work within one's limits and think through how do I best um, live out stopping, resting, delighting, and contemplating, and doing so while leading out of my marriage or family. So uh, I hear this one question. What are some spiritual practices that you have found helpful during your sabbatical? Um, Again, the spiritual practices, it's the same spiritual practices that are part of my everyday life. Uh, it's my silence and daily office and Lectio Divina. And now, of course, I'm having more times to go away to places for silence and solitude. Um, I'm having more opportunities to go attend conferences that are spiritually nourishing for me as well. And so, but that's what I mean about, the key to a sustainable life is a sustainable life. I think sometimes we think of these sabbaticals as like, oh, during the sabbatical, I'm just gonna, it's like I'm gonna eat at a buffet and that buffet is gonna keep me for the whole week. And it's like, well, it is a delicious buffet, but you're gonna get hungry again in a couple of days. And so what are the rhythms? Again, both physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. So in some ways, a sabbatical is emphasizing the rest portion so that I could have the practice of just letting the ground replenish. And so that's what I enjoy about it. So, but with that said, I would say if the formational practices and the spiritual disciplines that you carry today, if you realize that they have not been helpful in sustaining you for a life with God, I think then begin to introduce practices of silence, solitude, scripture, crafting a rule of life, which is week 8 in part 1 of the Emotion Healthy Discipleship course. Um, so, so that's what I would recommend. Uh, Nathan, good to see you, man. Do you have a set of questions or sabbatical prep checklist I could borrow? Aside from the principles that I just shared, as well, including stop, rest, delight, contemplate, and then people, practices, and places. Um, I mean, those are definitely part of what I'm thinking about when it comes to my checklist. But I'm also thinking about, again, my checklist of it's all the planning prior, right? So I'm going through the checklist of the inner life of a leader. What am I going to do to face my shadow? What am I going to do to invest in my marriage? And what am I going to do to slow down even further so that I can contemplate and delight? So now, in terms of tactile things, like I needed to, of course, hand over, and thankfully, I have a wonderful staff team and a wonderful elder board. Gosh, and they are so supportive, and I can't speak highly enough about them. And I mean, they were probably thrilled I was going on sabbatical too. Um, well, I hope and I think. And, so we are working on, okay, how do we transition some of the roles that I have in leading these kinds of meetings, or I'm preaching in this kind of setting here. And, there's a list of all those duties. And then there's a list of all the things that I'm going to come back to and how I'm going to come back to it. But now that I've done the sabbatical, I've learned each time from the sabbatical and from the sabbaticals that I've been on, which has been so helpful. So, okay. Angela, you asked this question. How do you plan a 3 to 4 month sabbatical when your spouse does not also get that same time? My husband is also a staff pastor. So currently I'm on a 4 week sabbatical and he was left in charge. We took 6 days to go away to a retreat center together. Wondering how to do that for 3 to 4 months. Yeah, gosh, Angela, I wish you could sync it. I totally acknowledge though, if you can't sync it, um, I would, in conversation with your spouse, um, have sit down conversations to plan out how this sabbatical can be replenishing to you. And so Angela, you get to dream up like, okay, what are the ways in which I'm gonna spend the time abiding in Jesus? And what are the things that I need that can give me spaciousness in my own life and journey? What are the ways that I can face my shadow? And also replenish relationally with your spouse. So I would just recommend in that kind of instance, obviously it's most ideal if you could do it together. If you can't, it's great that you did spend that time away, the week away, or that you mentioned. But I would also spend the time, Angela, it's a gift for you, these 3 to 4 months. And so in conversation with your spouse, um, you get to experience the gospel of grace, which is you can stop. You can rest in the grace of God. You are loved and you can replenish. And again, in conversation with your spouse, and hopefully your spouse is supportive of that, that you would have a time to actually replenish and be restored. So, um, friends, we're at the end of our time. I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to get to all these questions here. And wow, some great questions, everyone. Friends, I want to thank you for joining us. We're having a webinar each month. And next month, we're having a webinar on building a discipleship pathway, which I'm very passionate and excited about. Forgive me that we weren't able to get to all these questions, but remember the key to a sustainable life is a sustainable life. More than a sabbatical, it's how is your whole life being framed around Jesus? And that's really what we care so deeply about. But a sabbatical is such a significant part of that and is one of the gifts that God has given to us to tend the soil and to let it rest, and so that you can nourish in a significant way. I love sabbaticals, and ironically, it's also been the way for us to be more missional because it keeps me focused on discipleship. Um, Friends, thanks for being here. Grace and peace to you all. Happy sabbaticals, and hope you can join us for the school if you have not already signed up for that. Father in heaven, thank you so much for these friends who have joined us from around the world. God, may we be uh, the kind of Christians, uh, little Christs in the world, for the sake of the world, who be before we do, who abide in you, and who are emblematic of the kinds of lives um, that love you, that are trying to do the hard work of being transformed and leading out of our marriage or singleness and wanting to be the kind of people that experience loving union with you. Thank you for this group. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Hey, grace and peace, everyone. See you next month, and hope you can join us for the school. Thanks, everyone.